Nobody warns you about this part. Everyone talks about retirement, about slowing down, about finally having time for yourself. But nobody tells you that the people around you, some of them people you've known for decades, can quietly become the biggest threat to your peace, your money, and your health. Not strangers, not enemies, people you know, people you may even love. And here's the hardest part. Most men over 60 never say a word about it. Not because they don't feel it, but because they were raised to push through, to give people the benefit of the doubt, to not make a fuss. If that sounds like you, if you've been carrying the weight of certain relationships and wondering why you always feel worse after spending time with these people, you are not weak, you are not ungrateful, you are not imagining it. Stay with me. Because by the end of this you'll be able to name exactly who I'm talking about, and you'll have something you may never have given yourself before: permission to step back. I want to start with something that took me a long time to understand. For most of my life, I believed that the more people you kept close, the richer your life was. That loyalty meant staying, that love meant enduring, that a good man didn't walk away from people who needed him, no matter what those people cost him. I was raised that way. Most men my age were. And for a long time, for decades, I lived by that. I kept everyone close. I answered every call. I showed up when I was needed. I gave when I was asked. I stayed when leaving would have been easier, and I don't regret all of it. Some of those relationships were worth every ounce of what I put into them, but some of them weren't. And what I wish someone had told me, back when I was 60, 65, 70, is this: not all relationships are meant to last forever. Not all of them deserve equal access to your time, your energy, and your peace of mind. And protecting yourself from the ones that drain you is not selfishness, it is survival. At this stage of life, your time is the most finite thing you have. Your energy doesn't bounce back the way it did at 40. Your health, physical and emotional, responds to the people around you in ways you may not even realize until the damage is already done. So today I want to talk about 6 kinds of people. 6 types that, in my experience and in the experience of many men I've known, quietly take more than they give, that leave you feeling smaller instead of larger, that cost you something real, even when you can't always name what it is. And I want to be careful here because this is not a video about hatred or bitterness or burning bridges. It's about something quieter than that. It's about distance, thoughtful, deliberate, quiet distance. The kind that doesn't require a confrontation, doesn't require an explanation, doesn't require you to become someone you're not, just a gentle, steady step back. The stories I share today are composites, patterns drawn from many lives, shaped into something human and recognizable. They are not about any one person. If something feels familiar, that's because these patterns are common. You are not alone in having lived them. Nothing here is medical or psychological advice. These are the reflections of a long life, and the conversations I've had with men who were honest enough to say what most people never do. Let's begin. Person 1. The one who makes every conversation about themselves. You know this person. You've known them for years, maybe, decades possibly, and somewhere along the way you stopped being a participant in your conversations with them and became an audience. You call to share something, good news, a worry, something that happened that week, and within 2 minutes they've found a way to redirect it back to themselves, their problems, their stories, their opinions about what you should do, feel, or think. And the strange thing is, they're not always unpleasant about it. Some of the most relentless self-centered talkers are warm, funny, charming people. They just happen to treat every conversation like a monologue with occasional commercial breaks for you to speak. At 40 you could absorb this. You had the energy to give generously and go back for more. At 65, 70, 75, it costs you something different. There is something deeply human about wanting to be heard, about wanting the person on the other end of the phone, or across the table, to actually receive what you're saying, to hold it, to respond to it, not just wait for their turn. When that never happens, over months and years, It creates a kind of quiet loneliness that is actually worse than being alone. Because you're with someone, technically, but you're still not seen. I had a friend, I'll call him Arthur, who spent 30 years in a friendship like this. Every lunch, every phone call, every occasion, his friend talked. Arthur listened, and Arthur, being the man he was, told himself it was fine. His friend had a big personality. That was just how he was. It wasn't until Arthur's wife passed away, a real grief, a real loss, a moment when he needed more than he'd ever needed anything, that he called this friend and tried to talk about it. His friend listened for about 4 minutes, then said, "That reminds me of when my father passed," and talked for the next 45. Arthur told me later, "That was the day I realized I didn't have a friend. I had a regular appointment to be someone's audience." He didn't end the friendship in anger. He just quietly stopped making himself as available, stopped calling as often, filled that time with people who actually asked him how he was, and then waited for the answer. The distance he created didn't make him lonely. It made room for something better. If there's someone in your life who consistently leaves you feeling invisible after every interaction, consider what it would feel like to give that time to someone who actually sees you. Person 2. The permanent crisis. This person is always in trouble. Not occasionally, not once in a while, when life is genuinely hard. Always. There is always a crisis, a disaster, an emergency that needs your attention, your money, your time, your advice, your presence, right now. And the crises are real, at least some of the time. Real enough that you can't simply dismiss them. Real enough that your conscience won't let you walk away. But here's what you may have noticed if you've known this person long enough. The crises never stop. You help with one and another appears. You solve one problem and a new one materializes before the solution has had time to settle. And over time, you may have started to notice something uncomfortable, that this person's life doesn't actually improve, that the help you give doesn't seem to build toward anything, that you are a resource being accessed, not a person being valued. I knew a man, I'll call him Dennis, who had a brother-in-law like this. For 20 years Dennis helped. Money, time, phone calls at midnight, conversations that went in circles. Dennis told himself it was family, that you don't abandon family, and he didn't abandon him. But at 71, Dennis sat down and looked honestly at what those 20 years had cost him. The money was one thing, but the exhaustion, the particular grinding exhaustion of being someone's permanent solution, had taken something from him that money couldn't measure. He didn't cut his brother-in-law off. He just stopped being the first call, started letting other people and other resources absorb some of what he had always absorbed alone. And slowly, very slowly, he started to feel like himself again. Here is what I want you to hear clearly. Caring about someone does not mean being endlessly available to them. Loving someone does not mean letting their chaos become your permanent residence. You can wish someone well and still protect your own peace. Those two things are not in conflict. Person 3. The one who only appears when they need something. You haven't heard from them in months, maybe longer, and then the phone rings or the door opens and there they are, warm, friendly, glad to see you. And somewhere in the first 10 minutes of the conversation, the real reason for the visit begins to emerge. They need a favor, or a loan, or an introduction to someone you know, or advice on something that benefits them, or access to something you have. And here's the cruel thing about this pattern. They're often not unpleasant about it. They don't arrive demanding. They arrive charming. They ask about you first. They compliment the house, or how well you're looking, or how much they've missed you. And then, when the moment is right, the ask comes. I've known men who spent years in this pattern without naming it, because naming it meant admitting something uncomfortable, that someone they thought valued them was actually tracking their usefulness. A man I'll call Richard had a nephew like this. Richard was a generous man, had done well in his career, had a comfortable retirement, had always been the kind of uncle who showed up at birthdays and graduations. He thought the relationship was mutual, reciprocal. It wasn't until he went through a difficult period, a health scare, a stretch of months where he wasn't at his best, that he noticed something. His nephew didn't call, didn't visit. The silence was complete and unbroken. And when the health scare passed and Richard was back on his feet, the calls started again, warm, friendly, glad to hear he was doing better. Oh, and by the way, Richard told me, I finally understood. He didn't love me. He loved what I could do for him. And the moment I couldn't do anything, I didn't exist. The distance Richard created after that wasn't angry. It was simply honest. He stopped making himself available for one-sided transactions. He invested his time and warmth in people who called when there was nothing to ask for, who showed up when he was the one who needed something. At this stage of life, you don't have time to maintain relationships that only flow one way. Let the people who value you for you earn your presence. The rest can find their favors somewhere else. Person 4. The chronic complainer who refuses to change. Every life has problems. Every life has things worth complaining about. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the person for whom complaining is not a response to circumstances. It is a lifestyle. Everything is wrong. Everything is getting worse. The country, the weather, the neighbors, the family, the food, the prices, the doctor, the government. The list is endless and the volume never drops. And if you try to offer a different perspective, if you say, well, but there are some good things, aren't there? They have an immediate answer for why you're wrong, or naive, or just not seeing the full picture. Here's what the research on mood and social connection tells us broadly. The emotional tone of the people we spend time with affects our own emotional state over time. Not immediately, not dramatically, but steadily, quietly, the way a slow leak drains a tank. Spend enough time with someone who sees everything as dark, and the darkness starts to follow you home. I want to be careful here because there's a difference between someone going through a genuinely hard season, grief, illness, loss, and someone who has made negativity their permanent address. Grieving people deserve your presence. People in genuine pain deserve to be heard. But the person who has been saying the same things, in the same tone, about the same grievances, for the last 15 years, and who has never once taken any action to change their circumstances or their perspective, that person is not asking for your help. They are asking for your agreement, and your energy, and your time. A man I'll call Earl spent the better part of a decade having coffee every Thursday morning with a man he'd known since their working days. And every Thursday, without fail, it was the same. Everything wrong with the world, everything getting worse. Every optimistic thought Earl offered, shot down. Earl told me, I used to drive home from those Thursday coffees feeling like I'd been wrung out. I didn't understand why. He wasn't cruel, he wasn't even wrong about everything, but I always felt worse for having been there. He started stretching the coffees to every other week, then once a month, filled the Thursdays with a walk, or a call to his son, or simply sitting in his own yard in the quiet. Best thing I ever did, he said. I didn't know how much of his darkness I'd been carrying until I stopped picking it up. You are allowed to choose your atmosphere. You are allowed to protect the quality of your days from people who have decided that their days have no quality worth finding. Person 5. The guilt carrier. This one is the most difficult to talk about, because it often lives closest to home. The guilt carrier is the person in your life, sometimes a family member, sometimes an old friend, who has mastered the particular art of making you feel responsible for things that are not your fault, for choices you didn't make, for outcomes you couldn't control, for simply having a life that went differently than theirs. They don't always do it loudly. In fact, the most effective guilt carriers are quiet about it. It's in the sigh before they answer your question. It's in the "no, it's fine" that clearly means it is not fine. It's in the way they bring up the past, not to process it but to deploy it, to remind you of something you did or didn't do years ago that can now be used as leverage. I want to say something clearly. Genuine accountability is a good thing. Real conversations about real hurt, handled with honesty and care, can heal relationships and bring people closer. That is not what I'm describing. I'm describing the weaponization of guilt. The way some people use your conscience, your genuine desire to be a good father, a good brother, a good friend, a good man, as a handle to move you where they want you to go. A man I'll call Frank had a sister who had perfected this over 60 years. Every family gathering, every phone call, every holiday, Frank left feeling like he had done something wrong. He could never quite identify what, but the feeling was consistent and reliable. His wife noticed before he did. "You're different after you see her," she told him one evening. "Something goes out of you." Frank resisted that for a long time, because this was his sister, because family was family, because he'd been taught that you don't turn your back on blood. But eventually he started to ask himself a different question. Not what do I owe her, but what is this relationship actually costing me? And the honest answer, the one he'd been avoiding for decades, was more than it should. He didn't cut his sister out of his life, but he stopped attending every gathering. He stopped answering every call on the first ring. He started giving himself permission to say, quietly, without drama, "I can't make it this time." And the guilt that came with that, he learned to sit with it, to examine it, to ask, is this guilt because I actually did something wrong? Or is this guilt that was handed to me by someone who needed me to carry it? More often than not, it was the second. You are not responsible for everyone's unhappiness, and the people who need you to believe you are, they are not loving you, they are managing you. Person 6. The flatterer with an agenda. I saved this one for last, because it is the hardest to see coming. Every other person on this list gives you signals early. The complainer complains from the first conversation. The crisis maker arrives with a crisis. The one-sided talker starts talking over you before you've finished your first sentence. But the flatterer makes you feel wonderful. They tell you how sharp you are, how experienced, how they've never met anyone with your kind of wisdom, how much they value your perspective, how lucky they are to know you. And it feels good. Of course it does, because at 65, 70, 75, the world doesn't always make you feel that way. The world has a way of making older men feel invisible, irrelevant, past their prime. So when someone comes along who genuinely seems to see your value, who treats you like the wise, capable, experienced man you are, it is deeply, naturally appealing. And then, eventually, maybe weeks in, maybe months, the ask comes. An investment opportunity, a loan, a business idea that just needs a little backing, a favor that involves your connections or your name or your resources. And by that point, the relationship has been built so carefully, so warmly, that the ask doesn't feel like an ask. It feels like a natural extension of everything that came before. This is not an accident. A man I'll call Gene was 73 when he met someone like this through a mutual acquaintance. 6 months of friendship, real feeling friendship, lunches and phone calls and long conversations about life. Gene hadn't felt that kind of engaged, interested companionship in years, and then the investment came up. Gene lost a significant amount of money, but what hurt him more than the money, what he told me about with a quietness that I still remember, was the friendship. The loss of what he'd believed was real. "I knew it felt too good," he said. "I just didn't want to listen to that part of myself." Here's the rule I've come to trust. Genuine friendship builds slowly. It doesn't arrive fully formed, warm and attentive, with a sense of urgency about being close to you specifically. Real friends are glad you exist. They're not glad you're useful. If someone's warmth toward you feels slightly too consistent, slightly too focused, slightly too perfectly calibrated to what you need to hear, trust that quiet alarm inside you. It exists for a reason. You have earned your life, your resources, your experience, your name. They belong to you. And the people who want access to them without earning your trust honestly, they can find someone else. So there they are, 6 people. The one who talks and never listens, the permanent crisis, the one who only appears with an agenda, the chronic complainer, the guilt carrier, the flatterer with a plan. 6 different faces, 6 different methods, one common cost. They take more than they give, and at this stage of life you cannot afford to keep paying that cost. I want to say something important before we close. Creating distance from these people is not the same as becoming cold. It is not the same as giving up on people or becoming suspicious of everyone. The goal is not to shrink your world. The goal is to make your world better. Because every hour you spend with someone who drains you is an hour you didn't spend with someone who fills you. Every phone call that leaves you feeling worse is a phone call that crowded out one that might have left you feeling seen and glad. Distance from the wrong people creates space for the right ones. And the right ones, the friends who actually ask how you're doing and mean it, the family members who show up without needing anything, the people who make you feel more like yourself after time with them, those people deserve more of you, not less, more. You've spent 60, 70, 80 years being generous with yourself, with your time, with your patience, with your willingness to give people the benefit of the doubt. That generosity is not a flaw. It is one of the finest things about you. But generosity without discernment is not virtue. It's just depletion. You are allowed to choose. You are allowed to protect what you have left, the years, the energy, the peace, and give it to people and places and moments that are actually worth it. That is not selfishness. That is wisdom. Hard-earned, long overdue wisdom. If someone came to mind while you were listening today, if a face or a name surfaced while I was describing one of these 6, you don't have to do anything dramatic about it right now. Just sit with it. Notice how you feel after you spend time with them. Notice what you feel like before they arrive versus after they leave. That feeling is information. And you are old enough and wise enough to trust it. If you'd like to share what came up for you, even just a word or two in the comments, I'd be honored to read it. You might say something that helps another man name what he's been carrying for years. Take care of yourself. I'll see you in the next one.